referred to a pyramid of influence earlier. We kind of went over that pyramid of influence, how we have to build trust. We got to align with principles to build trust. And then we've got to build the relationship, listen to people so that they feel open to us. And then finally, we'll have influence. And that's really, really important. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most important principles in that pyramid of building the relationship. So the second level there, which is, well, let me tell you a few stories. We'll see if you can figure out what I'm talking about. So I want to tell you, I was at a bank once and I had this problem with my account. Okay. The problem with my account was that I didn't put money in the account when I should have put money in the account. And because of that, I was now severely overdrawn. I had some overdraft fees. I'm sure that's never happened to any of you. And anyway, I was a little bit embarrassed and I went down to this bank and I put the money in like I should have, and there was a gentleman there, we'll call him Jeff, who was really nice, and he helped waive some of the fees. And when he was done, I asked Jeff, I said, "Hey, Jeff, can I get the email to your boss?" And he looked at me kind of funny, like, "Well, why do you want the email to my boss?" I said, "Well, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did." And by the way he reacted, I could tell he wasn't used to this. So what I did is I went home that night. I had the email to his boss. And I also had Jeff's email. And I wrote this email that said something like this: "Dear Mr. Branch Manager, I had the opportunity of working with Jeff. He was very professional and helpful. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion." And I sent that email to his boss. And I copied Jeff on the email. And I didn't think really anything else about it. He helped me and I kind of helped him. Took 2 minutes to do that. Well, it was really interesting. I went back to that same bank. And by the way, this is kind of back in the days when you had to go to the bank maybe more than you do now. You can do a lot of it from your phone now. You can deposit and do all kinds of things. But back then you had to actually show up at the bank and make deposits with real paper checks and all kinds of things, more than we do today. And I was standing in line. There was maybe 10 people in front of me at the time. And something happened that had never happened to me before. Somebody came up to me and they knew my name, which was kind of unusual because I was in a decent sized city where a lot of people sometimes may not know everybody's name. And they came up to me and said, "Mr. Anderson." And I was a little bit surprised. I said, "Yes." And they said, "Can I help you with your banking?" And I said, "Well, sure." They took me from the back of the line. They brought me over to a desk and they let me do my banking in front of everybody else. You would have thought that I had $10 million at the bank, which we all know that I didn't. And it happened again and again at this bank where people would take me from the back of the line, let me do my banking in front of everyone else. And it was because... And well, let me tell you this, it didn't start happening until I had sent this email to Jeff's boss complimenting him to his boss. Well, why did that happen? I want to ask yourself, why did it happen? And I've asked this question to audiences all over, and a lot of times people will say things like this, where they say things like, "Well, maybe Jeff mentioned it to people in the break room and they wanted to get a raise too," which is possible. Or maybe he actually did get the raise, which is possible. I don't know. To be truthful, I don't really know, but I do know things changed after I sent that email to his boss. Now, so why did I get treated like a king of the bank? Well, there's a principle here. And the principle, I think, is the golden rule. And what the golden rule says is we need to treat other people like we want to be treated. In fact, it's one of the main principles of all human relations is we want to treat people like we want to be treated. Now, some psychologists don't like to call things stuff that's easy. And by the way, if you're a psychologist out there, I'm sorry. I actually studied a little bit of psychology in school. In fact, I have an undergrad in it. So I apologize if I said anything that was offensive. But a psychologist might say, "I know what you did. You did something called positive reinforcement." You see, when Jeff helped you fix the problem with his boss, you immediately gave him a reward by complimenting him to his boss. And I think they'd be right. Positive reinforcement has been shown to be very, very effective in shaping human behavior. So let's think about this for a second. Positive reinforcement says something like this: behaviors are like seeds, and attention is like water. So we water the behaviors we want to see grow with attention. Now, as a dad, this is super, super important. We want to help shape our children's behavior so that they can align with principles, right? So they can have the consequences that aligning with principles brings. And to do that, we've got to really be keyed in to behaviors. And so we can water those behaviors. So let me give you an example. My daughter got up once. My daughter's a wonderful girl. One time she got up and she was 6 or 7 and she said, "Hey, guess what, Dad? Surprise. I got ready for school. I made my bed. I made my lunch and I got dressed and I'm ready for school. And you didn't even have to tell me." And I went to my wife back in the closet, actually, to her room, and I said, "Hey, let's see if this behavior, let's see if this watering behaviors with attention really works." So again, the principle is if you see a behavior, if I have a water bottle here, I want to water the behaviors that I want to see grow with attention. Okay. So I said to her, "Oh, wow, that's great." I said, "Wow, your bed looks great and you made your lunch. We didn't even have to ask you. You got dressed ready for school and you didn't have to be asked. That's great." And my wife gave it a lot of attention too. We liked that behavior we were getting up, so we watered it with attention. Now, the interesting thing is, and I can't take credit for my daughter's behavior, she's a good girl. But the interesting thing is she did the behavior again, and we kept watering it for attention, and she did it again. And she became the kind of person who always did that. Now, can I take credit for that? Maybe, maybe not. But I do think the principle of, in fact, I'm going to say I can't take credit. I'm going to say it was her choices to do it. So I'm not going to take credit for that. But I do think it's people like to get attention for what they do right. Now, have you ever seen a parent? The kid walks in and the parent says, "I can't believe you stayed up till 3 a.m. and you didn't make your bed and you're getting a C- in math," and all these, whatever it is. What is that parent doing? Well, the parent is trying to get rid of the behavior. They're trying to bring up the fact that they stayed up too late, that they didn't make their bed, that they're getting a C- in math. But what they may inadvertently be doing is actually strengthening the behavior they don't want. You see, what they're doing is they're watering that behavior of not making their bed and getting a C- and staying out too late with attention. Remember, attention has been found to be very reinforcing. And in many situations, they may be making the behavior worse. Did you hear that? If we want to be able to shape behavior, in other words, if we want to make it more likely, remember, this is category 2. We had three categories of our problems: stuff we have total control over, stuff we have some control over, stuff we have zero control over. Well, relationships fall into that category 2 problem where stuff that we have some control over, some influence over. And one of the best ways we can try to increase our chances of having positive influence over people is to catch them doing something right. There's a story of a child who was sent to the principal's office all the time. And this child he was getting in trouble. And it became such a problem that they called in the school counselor and they wanted to see, try to help fix this problem with this child who was getting sent to the principal's office all the time. Well, the counselor came in and observed that the child was doing a lot of things right. But the teacher was giving the child zero attention, nothing for it. But as soon as the child would do something wrong, the teacher would give him a lot of attention. So, might do something wrong, and they'd write his name on the board. And then you do something else wrong, and you might get a check mark, and you do something else wrong, and you might get another check mark. So then he had enough check marks to be marched down to the principal's office. And of course, he's getting a lot of attention from the teacher and from the children who are observing this because he's doing something wrong. They marched him down to the principal's office, and they found that he was being kind of doubly reinforced because they put him next to this window in the principal's office where when the bell rang, all the kids came by and kind of waved him in the window. So he was getting a lot of attention from his peers for kind of being the cool bad kid as he waved through the window. And so the child was being doubly reinforced by the teacher and by getting attention from his peers for doing behavior that was not desirable. And it was kind of predictable. The child's getting zero attention for what's right and getting a lot of attention for doing what's wrong. You see, as a dad, if you want to be a good shaper, influencer over behavior, what we got to do is start paying attention to the behaviors we want. And oftentimes, just like this child, your children are doing a lot of things desirable that you're just not watering with attention. Again, attention's like water, behaviors are like seeds. Now it's behaviors we're looking for. So one of the things that I've learned from a wonderful book called The Power of Positive Parenting by Glenn Latham. If you don't have it, check it out. It's a great book. In the book, they talk about catching your kids doing something right. So when your kids are behaving, A lot of parents say, well, I don't want to bug my children. They're playing nicely, so let's just leave them alone. But maybe that's exactly the wrong thing to do. When they are playing nicely, we want to water that behavior with attention. So you might go in and say, I love it when you play with your brother Johnny. I like that you're sharing so kindly. I love that you're putting a lot of work into that math problem. Good job. Now, you got to be careful to water the behavior and not use labels. It's more effective to water the behavior. So you can say, I love the effort you're putting in that math problem. I can see that you put a lot of time and you're working on it. That's a lot better than saying you're smart. Smart's a label. What we're trying to do is strengthen the behavior, not label the kid as smart or dumb or anything else. So it's more effective to point out the behavior. Instead of saying, hey, you're awesome, you could say, hey, I like it when you share with your brother Johnny, or I love it when you play nicely, or I love it when you speak calmly. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times parents do exactly the opposite. They let their kids have zero attention when they're doing something right, and then they give them tons of attention when they're doing something wrong. Have you ever seen a kid who's tantruming? Well, kid who's tantruming, is if you look carefully, a lot of times the parents who are really frustrated with the behavior are actually feeding into it. What they don't realize is you never seen the kid's tantruming and flailing his arms or legs on the floor and doing all these kinds of things. And the parents saying, oh, you're embarrassing mommy right here in the store. Do you want a reward? Like they'll say, do you want a phone or an iPad? Can I give you a sucker? Do something to be quiet. What happens is the child quickly learns that if he misbehaves in tantrums, mommy and daddy will give him attention. And that's just unfortunately feeding into the behavior. One of the things that was spoken about in this book is if a child's tantrum, and you could have a conversation with them beforehand and say, hey, when you act like that, you get to have a zero reinforcing environment. So you can sit a corner, was suggested as a really good place to let kids burn out. So you don't send them to their room where they can read a book or get on a device or anything like that. You put them in a corner where they get zero reward, zero attention, zero reinforcement. And a lot of times it might take them a long time to burn out. Now, of course, as a parent, you can make sure that they're not in pain some way. You can make sure that there's not, the clothes are too tight or they were sitting on something sharp or something. That's really important to make sure they're not in pain. But if it's just a tantrum where they're just screaming and flailing, trying to get attention, to not give them any attention and let them burn out in the corner is probably a good thing to do. Now, here's the problem. A lot of parents, when they first start doing this, can't do it. They're like, I can't bear to see my baby screaming in the corner for 8 minutes. And so they go give him attention after 8 minutes of screaming. Well, what did they just taught the kid? If you scream for 8 minutes, you'll get mommy or daddy's attention. What you need to do is let them burn out. Now, burning out might take 20 minutes, might take 25 or 30 minutes. When they finally burn out and they're acting calm, that's the time to go over and say, hey, give them some attention, right? Water the behavior of the calmness and say, hey, I love it when you're calm like that. Wow, it's good that you're talking to me so calmly and nicely. I love it when you do that. Great job. And so what we want to do, and they found if you do this, this is a super, like maybe one of the most effective ways to shape human behavior. Now, you can use punishment, you can use negative reinforcement, not as effective though. And that's research-based. You can look at that. The best way to get rid of problem behavior, and I'll say it again, is to focus on the good behavior. The best way to get rid of problem behavior is to focus on the good behavior. Now, you can still have boundaries. You can still talk about what's appropriate and what's not. And you definitely want to let people know. You want to let your kids know, hey, I love you no matter what. But when you act that way, you don't get attention. So it's not conditional love we're showing them. What we're showing them is teaching them how to behave in real society. If they start throwing tantrums in the real world later when they're older, they could get fired from a job. They could have all kinds of relationship problems. They could have, things could go really awry if they don't learn when they're young to not throw tantrums. And so you're doing them a favor by saying, look, I'm going to give you attention when you act appropriately, and I'm not going to give you attention when you're not. And if you do it clinically, if you do it consistently, you'll see what happens is, let's say there's a graph and you're having a high level of tantrums. When you first start saying, I'm going to catch you doing something right, which is important, and then and start ignoring the bad behavior, the tantrums might actually go up a little bit in the short run because they're like, well, this worked forever. Why is dad ignoring me now? But in the long run, they go way down. You might have a little relapse here or there, but if you're consistent and say, let's catch my kids doing something right. And in fact, I think they suggest maybe as much as 20 times an hour when they're behaving that you go give them a pat on the back or a smile or a little hug or a little word of encouragement, something that shows, hey, when you behave this way, you get a lot of attention. And when you're behaving completely irrationally and just trying to get attention, you need to go let that burn out. And that combined with letting them know that you love them no matter what, but that you're not going to tolerate the tantruming and they get to be zero reinforced might work. So do you see how that changing your approach to tantruming, deciding to give attention to good behaviors? Now, here's the thing. That's what happened at the bank. What would have happened though? Let's talk about this. Remember, with any principle, we can align with it or we can ignore it. What would have happened if I would have went to the bank and I would have said, I can't believe you guys gave me so many fees. You better fix this and you better fix it now. Could I have gotten my problem fixed at the bank? If I came in and said, if you don't fix this, I'm going to tell everybody what a bad bank you are and I'm going to take my business elsewhere. Could I have gotten my problem fixed? And the answer is, I probably could have, maybe in the short run. But what would have happened when I came back to the bank a week later? They might have said something like this: watch out for that guy. He's a little bit of a time bomb. And by the way, make him wait a little bit longer because he's a little bit of a jerk. Would they have treated me like a king? No. You see, I've seen people in business who for a while they're a jerk, and a year or two later, nobody wants to do business with them. As a parent, you can be a jerk, but then eventually you get to a point where the kids don't want to be around you. So what we're really trying to do is build the behaviors we want in our children by catching them doing something right. And we also want them to associate, my dad's a positive guy. My dad knows when I do good things. He sees it. And they want to get that attention from you. And that's one of the best ways, one of the best tools you can have in this category 2 type influence. And so keep that in mind. When we're trying to shape behavior, catch people doing something right. I can't stress this enough. This is one of the hugest things. Now, a lot of times behavior that's good is mixed with behavior that's bad. Let me give you an example. One time I was giving a speech and I was in front of this group and there was a guy at the back of the room and he started heckling me. He started telling me all the reasons he thought I was up in the night. And there was a part of me that wanted to go to battle with this guy. I wanted to say, you know what, let me show you the research. And I wanted to just kind of go to war. But instead of doing that, what I did instead was ignore the number of points that he made that I thought were not productive and try to find something that I could latch onto. So I don't remember exactly how many he said, but let's say it was 8 or 9 or 10 things. I ignored, say, 7 or 8 of those things, and I latched onto the 1 or 2 things that I could say, hey, those I can agree with. I just ignored the others. And I said, you know what, I really appreciate you making this point and this point. Didn't mention anything about the other points. Then on the break, I went up to him and I said, hey, I really appreciate you making this point and this point. You know what was really interesting? After that break, and for the remainder of that class, it was a class or speech. It was a speech in a class, it was giving a class and workshop together. He became productive. He became contributing, which by the way proved my point, but I didn't tell him that. You see, when we want to shape behavior, even if the behavior is mixed in with something that's not as desirable, start focusing really in on that one behavior. You want to be an influential dad. You want to have influence with your children. You want to have influence with your spouse. You want to have influence with anybody. Stop paying, let me give you one example. Is there behaviors that are going on in your home right now that are just kind of garden variety weed behaviors? I'm not talking about like abusive behaviors. I'm talking about like somebody's leaving the socks out or somebody's leaving the toilet seat up or down or something. Here's what I want you to try. I want you to try for the next week to never mention that behavior again. Bite your tongue. Bite your tongue till, you might have to bite it till it bleeds, figuratively speaking. Bite your tongue. Don't say anything about it. And then at the same time, try to catch them doing something right. And often that loved one or that child, that spouse, they'll be doing something right more than you think about it. Okay? Catch them doing something right and point that out a lot. Try to point out at least a 5-to-1 ratio of things people are doing right. Okay? And watch the behavior change. In fact, sometimes the bad behavior will actually evaporate when you start giving attention to the good behaviors. You've got to do this consistently. You can't say, oh, I did it one time and it didn't work. We're talking it's got to be done consistently over time, that I'm going to catch my children doing stuff right and give them a lot of attention for the behaviors they're doing right, instead of watering the behaviors with criticism or other things. Try it today. I want you to take the worksheet that's attached. I want you to come up with a game plan of how you're going to water behaviors you want to see grow. Thanks for listening today. This is a huge one. Practice this again and again throughout the course. Huge in trying to influence. Thanks for listening.